This is Connected, sharing our stories and bringing colleagues together across NSS.
Hello listeners and a warm welcome to a special festive edition of Connected, your podcast from NHS National Services Scotland. I'm Richard Pigeon and joining me today is Lisa Walker and Karen White.
Thanks, Richard. Today's episode is packed with features highlighting the work going on across both NSS and NHS Scotland. We caught up with Jacqui Reilly, Director of Nursing at NSS, to find out about the Year of the Nurse campaign and the roles of nurses in NSS.
Some listeners might not be aware that we have several nurses working in a variety of roles across NSS.
Yeah, that's right, Karen. We have nurses who work in the blood collection teams at SMBTS, working in procurement and in the National Contact Tracing Centre. To celebrate the Year of the Nurse and Midwife, we've written a series of blogs on our nurses. Check out the NSS website to find out more.
And it's worth mentioning that one of the nurses featured was our newly appointed Chief Executive, Mary Morgan, who started her career in the NHS as a nurse herself.
Thanks, Karen. Also in the episode, we spoke to Dr. Martin McKechnie to find out more about his role as both a consultant in emergency medicine within NHS Lothian and clinical lead for the Scottish Trauma Network here within National Services Scotland. He tells us more about the transformation of trauma care.
And finally, to tell us more about a piece of work that has affected everyone in the NHS in Scotland is Stewart Robison from NSS Digital and Security. He's here to tell us what's next in the rollout of Microsoft Office 365.
Thanks, Lisa. Teams has certainly transformed how we all work, so I'm looking forward to hear what Stewart has to say about the next exciting developments with Office 365. Also in this episode, we have the usual news roundup feature and a special shout-out section to allow our colleagues to recognise the excellence of their co-workers throughout our organisation. But without any further ado, let's get connected. "2020 is Florence Nightingale's bicentennial year, designated by the World Health Organization as the first ever global year of the nurse and midwife. Nurses and midwives make up the largest numbers within the NHS workforce. They are highly skilled, multifaceted professionals from a host of backgrounds and representing the full diversity of our communities. Stephanie Stevenson caught up with Jacqui Reilly, Director of Nursing at NSS, to find out more about the crucial role played by nurses throughout our organisation.
Today I am joined by our Director of Nursing, Professor Jacqui Reilly, who is here to tell us a bit more about the Year of the Nurse and the Midwife and what it's like working for NSS. Hi, Jacqui.
Hi.
When and how did you end up working for NSS? Can you tell me a little bit more about your background?
So I've been a nurse for many years in a whole variety of sectors, from community to acute, and more recently in public health. And I've been in this role as the Director of Nursing for NSS for the last 2 years.
Ah, brilliant. And what makes it so interesting, this job that you're in?
It's so interesting because we have such a breadth of services in NSS, and our clinicians that work within the organisation, inclusive of all our nurses and midwives, have specialist knowledge and specialist roles, and that variety makes the work that we do so interesting and so important in terms of the expertise and advice that we can give to the whole of NHS Scotland and care and community beyond that.
Ah, amazing. Is there any types of fields you'd like to tell our listeners a bit more about that the specialist nurses work in, something that we might have not heard before or something that you're passionate about?
So we have nurse-led services in areas such as specialised infection prevention and control, which of course has been absolutely critical in the national pandemic response here. And we also have specialist nurses that work in occupational health, and they've been at the forefront of our vaccinations. Every year they lead our vaccinations for flu. They look after all our staff well-being all year round. And of course, they're at the forefront of the COVID vaccination programme. And then we also have specialised services that have nurses, such as our blood transfusion service. So we have clinical apheresis nurses who work doing direct patient care in the apheresis units across Scotland. And we also have our donor services where we have all our collection services for blood across Scotland too. And we also have some specialist nurses in digital, and we also have specialist nurses in commissioning and facilities. So we've a real breadth of specialisms and specialist areas across the organisation.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, it sounds very, very varied. Like, I didn't know about convalescence plasma service development. Would you like to tell me a little bit more about that?
So this is one of the treatments for COVID-19, and it is being led in terms of its delivery by SMBTS within NSS, and our nursing services have been supporting the development of all of that. So whether it be from the actual collection service so that we can actually get the convalescence plasma for that treatment, or whether it's actually been delivering that treatment. So our services are involved in the leadership of that across Scotland.
That sounds amazing. And as I mentioned before, this year is the year of the Nurse and Midwife. Would you like to tell me why it's so important? Like, obviously beforehand it had been running before COVID happened, and then COVID hit. Would you say that it's amplified the need for nurses, or like just highlighted how important they are?
So the Year of the Nurse and Midwife celebration was really about acknowledging the critical contribution that nurses and midwives make to global health. And there's never been a time that this has been more illuminated than during this COVID pandemic. And in fact, in NSS, many of our nurse-led services are leading a lot of the response for the pandemic, and their services are really visible both nationally and internationally, whether it's the Our High Scotland team or the occupational health team or our blood transfusion nurses. All of these nurses are at the forefront of that response nationally. So as you rightly say, the pandemic has illuminated the nursing contribution to preventing infection and controlling disease, but they have a much wider role in their everyday practice that's around supporting safe, effective, in-person centred care in the organisation.
It sounds like absolutely amazing, the work that they're doing, even if COVID wasn't a thing, you know, just to hear all the different stories that have come out and just celebrating all the different work that they do. Is there anything you'd like to say to people that were considering getting into nursing, possibly in the near future, or I don't know, just from like COVID, what's happened? Would you like to say like different challenges that have been met, but all the different opportunities that you can have when you get into nursing, if someone like listening to this?
So nurses work in really challenging circumstances, never more than the COVID pandemic, and they need to be valued and resourced to provide safe, effective and person-centred care. And the World Health Organization in the Year of the Nurse really challenges us to think about investing in more nurse-led services, which is exactly the focus of what we have in our clinical workforce plan within NSS, and also investing in more specialist nurses, and NSS has that at the heart of all its nursing services. Also making nurses more central to primary health care, but also supporting health promotion and disease prevention, which is absolutely at the heart of all of our nursing services. And our commitment within the organisation is to leadership development of all our nurses in this regard. We are keen to use the platform of the Year of the Nurse to continue to build on the fantastic nursing services that we already have, and making sure that those are visible and attractive for people to come into, both in terms of our own succession planning of our extant workforce, but also the recruitment of new staff that we need for these new services, such as those in convalescent plasma.
Absolutely. And seeing as this year of the nurse is like highlighting exactly why we need nurses and our midwives, would you say that there's anything special that makes nursing for NSS different to any other type of nursing? Is it the specialist fields that you can go into, or is it the organisation as a whole? Just anything that you think that stands out to you since you've come into your role that you would like to highlight to other people?
So NSS is a great place to work. It's a fantastic organisation. It's got great values at the heart of what it does and a broad range of services that you can connect to. The interesting thing about working in NSS is the ability that you have to impact on national policy and national practice with the expertise that we offer to the whole of the NHS and beyond. And so it's a real opportunity to have that impact in making a difference day to day in your nursing practice.
That sounds really, really good. That's really nice to hear, and I'm sure our listeners would enjoy hearing that too. Before I sign off, would you like to give me any examples from your job, like how you found working in your role as director, that you found possibly challenging, that you've like rose to the challenge too, but anything that you would like to point out that's happened over the last 2 years, any good experiences, but just whatever you think springs to mind since you've been in this role.
Oh gosh, wasn't thinking about that.
For me, as a new person, for listeners, I don't know what your day-to-day is as a director. Are you speaking to nurses every day? Or are you more in the office side?
So the nurse director role in NSS is such an interesting one. You have a large portfolio of work. So day to day, I'm connecting to the senior nurses in each of the bits of our specialised services and making sure that we have the right professional governance and oversight. But I also hold executive responsibility for a number of different things for the organisation. So that actually includes things such as healthcare associated infection. And so making sure that we are implementing all the infection prevention and control measures within our organisation, but also quality improvement. And that's something that's really important to me, and we've had a real focus on in the last year or so in the organisation and hope to continue to focus on. And I'm also the executive lead for whistleblowing in the organisation, which is a really important thing for people to be able to raise concerns when they want to. So I have a quite broad range of subjects that I'm involved in day to day, and I'm part of the executive management team in the organisation, so involved in a lot of the corporate decision making and planning across the organisation.
It sounds really, really interesting. Would you say, sorry, this is like I don't need to put this in if you don't want to. I want to ask, would you say COVID has kind of made, I don't know who you report to, but would you say it's made people take certain problems or challenges more seriously? Say there was certain needs that were needing to be met before, and now COVID has kind of highlighted things. Would you say that's kind of sped up the process for some things, or has it actually created more hurdles? Or is it maybe a mix of the two?
I think during the pandemic, because of the nature of having to produce new guidance in the organisation, so for example, in infection prevention and control, we produced the national guidance for the whole of Scotland. And in doing that, we would normally take quite some time and be very planned about it and make sure that we include everyone in the process and that we have a dissemination plan that is, timed. And of course, in a pandemic, you don't have that time to spend. No. So at the pace at which the teams have had to work has been phenomenal. And the pace at which the whole of the NHS has had to implement things has also been phenomenal. And that's been important to be that reactive in the response. And we need to hold on to some of the pace that we can work at when it's required, but also try to balance that with making sure that we have the well-being of all our staff at the heart of what we do. So that's been something that's really important to me, and we're really continuing to champion across the organisation.
Of course. And so as you've highlighted, I'd say communication skills have been imperative for this sort of thing, like you say, to work at such a pace. I take it things have gotten better, like you're able to like get things a lot quicker, and so that's something you'd want to carry on, is that people are like, there's a lot of more camaraderie, like try to help each other because everyone's in the same boat.
So I think during the pandemic there has been collaboration at a level that we have never seen before, because there has been a shared common purpose.
Yeah.
And I think there is a shared common purpose every day within the NHS about providing safe, effective care. And it's important to hold on to that shared purpose in the way that we act, whether it's in a pandemic or not.
That sounds great. And finally, I think just to round up, is there anything you're looking forward to in the new year? Any challenges that you're setting for yourself, or doesn't have to be within your role? It could be a personal thing.
So I think the challenges for the new year will be continuing to manage the pandemic response as we continue to remobilise a lot of our services and implement these new services. And that's a lot for people to do. So getting the balance right around all of that. So work-life balance for everyone, including myself, will be a key priority in the coming year.
Jacqui Reilly, thank you very much for joining us today. It was very lovely to speak to you, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to do some NSS shout-outs. This is a way to continue what was so well achieved at the Excellence event. We want to continue that momentum. We want to keep shouting out people. We want to keep talking about the great stuff that goes on, not just once a year, but every single month. We want to hear your stories about colleagues who are going above and beyond, not just with COVID, but, you know, with the day-to-day stuff too. So please get in touch with your stories, and we'd love to hear from you.
Amanda Walker from within Procurement, Commissioning and Facilities wants to single out Willie McGee for being such a great leader and inspiration. And it seems that Willie must be a great leader because Willie has also recommended a couple of his colleagues for shout-outs, including Amanda, who joins Paul Byrne as being recommended by Willie for a shout-out. And Willie says, "I was amazed but not surprised by the dedication and long hours that was put in at the start of the pandemic. The quality and attention to detail while under pressure was absolutely outstanding." So there's Willie praising Amanda, and Amanda singling out Willie as being a great inspiration. A really nice piece there from PCF. And we should also point out that Willie also highlighted Gordon James and Jim Miller as being deserving of shout-outs as well. And Willie says, "The bosses often don't get the credit they deserve. But if it wasn't for Gordon and Jim making very timely and quick decisions on the purchase of additional oxygen equipment, our response to the pandemic would not have been as robust." So there you go. Across the organisation, individuals recognising the contributions of their colleagues.
Margaret Gibson from the NSS Digital and Security team wants to shout out the NSS 365 rollout team made up from staff all across NSS. She says it's been an absolute pleasure to work with a collaborative NSS team leading the successful rollout of Teams and email. And you'll hear more about that rollout in our interview with Stewart Robison later in the podcast. She also wants to shout out Marianne Fisher, also from DAS. She says, "Thanks for pulling together an amazing 365 core team, always being there for everyone and keeping it fun." Thanks so much, Marianne.
Kirsten Thompson from SPST wants to shout out Mairead Gardner, who has been an absolute rock for her. She provides support, care, empathy, and is a key ally. I also want to put my shout out in there too, as she is my line manager. So I might be a bit biased, but I think she's been absolutely brilliant, especially when I've been joining this team virtually, not getting to meet anyone in person. She's been absolutely amazing. Kirsten also wanted to shout out Marie Claire Miller, who also works in the Marcoms team. You have been a great asset and we are thankful.
The next shout out is from Caroline McDermott from SPST, who wants to give a shout out to all the staff who kept the organisation and business as usual services running. She said, "I'd like to recognise the hard work done by everyone who made great efforts to keep the organisation running and business as usual services going during the COVID pandemic. They might not have worked on a high-profile project, but their contributions are necessary, and many worked really hard in difficult circumstances to support their colleagues and keep services going." Thanks so much, Caroline, for that lovely shout out, which includes all our colleagues working hard behind the scenes.
Scotland's geography, weather and infrastructure pose unique challenges when it comes to treating trauma patients. The introduction of the Scottish Trauma Network created a specialist system, bringing together highly specialised multidisciplinary teams into major trauma centres across the country. Lisa Walker recently spoke to Dr. Martin McKechnie to find out more about the network that delivers the best possible trauma care for patients, no matter where the incident takes place or where they live.
Martin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today.
You're very welcome, Lisa.
It is no secret to my colleagues that ever since we launched our podcast, we've only got about 5 episodes, but I've been absolutely desperate to get you on just to speak more about your role, emergency medicine, and also as your role in the Scottish Trauma Network.
Sure.
Have you always wanted to specialise in emergency medicine, or was it something that you decided to do later?
So that's a good question. It makes me confess to being very old, because it didn't really exist as a recognised specialty when I began to get interested in it. I mean, it was a very young specialty, and I had a few serious sort of hero role models within it. And I remember working in my very first jobs as a house officer in Glasgow, and my job as a surgical junior house officer often took me down to an accident and emergency department, where I realised that that's where all the fun was. It was very exciting. I was very impressed by the capabilities of all the staff. It was definitely the buzzy place within the hospital where all the action was, where there was lots of food, which was always good. All the best nurses were there. I mean, they're a special breed, emergency department nurses. And I thought, find myself hanging about there during on-call nights. I eventually, I think, just asked, about a possible future job, and I was interviewed and I got a job there. And I loved it. And so the answer to your question is, I had no idea that's what I wanted to do, but it very much found me just by chance. So I'm very proud to be part of it. I'm very proud of the people I work with, which might sound a bit patronising, but I really am. I think they are what we call the work family. We all have a very team-orientated attitude and a very supportive base that is really the crux and the nub of what we do. So we rely on each other all the time, and it's a sort of environment that I really quite enjoy.
I think one of the things that's really been at the forefront of everyone's minds during the pandemic is the sort of family, the family that you find at work, especially within the NHS. But we're still very much in the midst of this pandemic. Has working in the emergency department changed, or do you find that your day-to-day is more or less the same?
It is both, if that isn't too much of a fudge. It has changed. It has changed hugely, while at the same time we still do the work. No matter what comes, we do it. It's one of the great positives about the people who do my job, is they're pretty adaptable and they're pretty resilient. They have to be. Resilience is a very trendy word at the moment, and I think sometimes we feel somewhat patronised by that. You don't need to tell us anything about being resilient. We've been resilient for decades. As lots of public perceptions and experiences and political machinations have changed the way that health care is delivered. Whatever comes, we deal with it. in any number and at any time and in any state. So, we are by nature a resilient bunch, and part of that is because we have a family attitude and we have a supportive network, and we have a sense of humour, which may sometimes be dark humour, but it's very much part of what makes the team click. We may be the jack of all trades and master of nothing in particular, but as the teams have grown, we have got a huge range of expertise and experience and skill. So I have consultant colleagues who do other specialty jobs as well, in intensive care and paediatric emergency medicine and toxicology and acute medicine and what we call pre-hospital retrieval medicine, flying about in helicopters and screaming sirens going to crash sites, etc. And as well as people like me who are doing what you might call pseudo-political or administrative jobs and trying to deliver this trauma network. And, we get involved in a bit of managerial stuff, which used to be, a little bit frowned upon. But of course, it's a bit like being in politics. You only get things done by being in position to influence change and to direct and to strategize and to persuade people that, things can be done slightly better if you do it this way or that way or the other. So that's going to be a work in progress until long after I'm gone. And it's definitely a skill set that people in my specialty have, is being adaptable and being able to get on with lots of different types of people. It's part of the skill set that I'm continually impressed by. The people that I work with have a lot of sub-skills, not just in their day-to-day job as an emergency medicine consultant, because we have to still be able to deal with whatever comes in through the door.
You did mention that one of the sort of specialties that you're involved in is dealing with trauma as part of your work with the Scottish Trauma Network. Is that sort of drive for wanting to be a positive change the reason that you got involved with the Scottish Trauma Network, or how did you end up doing that?
I wouldn't claim any altruistic, heavenly mission to make that specific thing better. I think it definitely appealed to me when I saw the description of what was planned. It was a colleague of mine who had basically nudged me in that direction to say, "Have you looked at this? Have you thought about this? This might suit you." And in a way, I was sort of looking for something to do. To be honest, I had been involved more in the political media side of promoting the specialty as I was the vice president of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine for 3 years, which is a fantastic grounding and learning experience in how to persuade people that we were worth supporting and investing in, and it was going to be mutually beneficial, not only to the public, but to the politicians to invest in my specialty, because, again, at the risk of sounding slightly knowledgeable after the event, we are and were the only show in town when it came to dealing with the hugely rising demand on healthcare. And so our specialty needed to be supported in investment because there wasn't really an alternative. So when it came to this job, I could see that there were lots of skills that I'd perhaps developed during that vice presidency that might be useful in trying to get the trauma network set up. And the remit of the trauma network has changed drastically as a result, because at the beginning, it was a more limited picture that was painted, or a more defined picture, should I say. And the financial resource that went with that, would have done a certain thing, but it quickly became apparent to me that we had the opportunity to do a lot more than what was initially described. And gradually, by hook and by crook, with a bit of persuasion and begging and humour, we got a significantly greater amount of investment for a significantly greater, broader, deeper project, which is now up and running and about to be fully, the final piece of the jigsaw will be March next year, when both the major trauma centres in Glasgow and in Edinburgh open. And essentially that'll be that major part of it done, and the whole network will be up and running with all the supporting structures of trauma units and local emergency hospitals, all brought together by a fantastic network. And I'm just very grateful to everyone for all the hard work that they've done, and I've just been amazed by the brilliance of everyone that gets involved in this. They really are fantastic, and I think the patients will benefit, and that's the next phase of the network, is to tell the story of how we've improved things through data and health economic analysis and patient stories and outcomes, because in the long run, we know that it is better to rehabilitate people who have suffered hideously traumatic injuries and try and get them back to functioning, productive members of society as best we can. And a lot of that will fall on our friends in rehabilitation. So the whole thing from roadside to rehabilitation and recovery, as part of our saving lives, giving life back, has come to pass, and I've just been amazed by that.
It's such an interesting topic because I think a lot of patients who have been touched by trauma will possibly not even realise that they've been part of the Scottish Trauma Network. So what did the picture look like before the Scottish Trauma Network existed?
The difference will be, if I start from the positive outcome, the difference of the new system, the Scottish Trauma Network, will be in taking the most severely and seriously injured patients rapidly and brilliantly to the most appropriate place for them. And by that, I mean there's no point in taking a patient who has got a serious, say, penetrating injury to their chest to a hospital that does not have a cardiothoracic or a vascular surgeon available. And not every hospital can have that. Very few, in fact, can have that. And the benefits of a major trauma centre is that all or most of the specialties, which are really surgical specialties, but of course you understand we have anaesthetists and we have intensive care and we have emergency medicine and we have rehabilitation and we have all manner of supporting specialties. But the major surgical specialties will be the chaps and chapesses who deal with these serious injuries are not available at every hospital in Scotland. And neither can there be. It's a very specialised skills that some of the surgeons who deal with these injured patients have. The skill sets that they have are very specialised and specific. The idea of a trauma centre is to have all of these personnel on one site and available should that be required as soon as the patient comes in. So it's about identifying that patient at the scene and taking them directly to the place where they will get the best treatment. And that will mean going past hospitals with lights on and open doors, which sometimes is counterintuitive for not only patients but staff as well, and particularly ambulance staff. And I realise this is a huge pressure on them to make these calls on the scene. They're the staff who are making these very, very serious, important calls. But the Trauma Network, in collaboration with the ambulance service, has set up a trauma desk, which has now become a critical care desk through the COVID experience. We are adapting the models in terms of transfer, transport, and rapid movement of patients, not only from trauma but into the COVID environment and the post-COVID environment, because there are lots of similarities about where patients need to go for specialist treatment. Once that's done, we can then move the patients back into their community with a very strong supportive rehabilitation environment to make the best recovery. So that I think will be the main difference. And it also means that the other hospitals, and I work in what you might call a small hospital, but it's not a small hospital, it's a big hospital. What it doesn't do is see the types of patients that I've described, the ones that might need very specialist surgical expertise. So I work in one of those and as well as a major trauma centre. So I think the staff will benefit as well from seeing this from both sides when they are both receiving patients and rehabilitating patients.
How many of the major trauma centres are there across Scotland? You mentioned, I think, one of them in NHS Lothian, is that right?
Sure. So there will be 4. By March 2021, our 4th and final one will be open. So the first one to open was in Aberdeen in October 2018, Dundee at Nine Wells Hospital in November 2018, and then the Queen Elizabeth in Glasgow will be middle March in March 2021, and then finally the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh will be late March in 2021. So there will be 4 major trauma centres, and there, as I say, each of the other hospitals will play a part in the trauma network. They will be either what's called a trauma unit, which still sees significant amounts of injured people, but maybe not with all of the surgical expertise available on site. So again, that comes down to the call made at the scene or by the staff about where shall we send this patient and how do we get them there quickly? Is it by helicopter, by ambulance, or do we bring a team to the patient? That's the other expertise area that is growing and booming under the auspices of the ambulance service and of the trauma network. And the trauma desk run by the ambulance service will say, there's an incident, there's the type of incident, there's the number of casualties, what's our resource available, what can we send, how quickly. But we also have, of course, lots of people trained on the ground in terms of our local GPs in the remote and rural areas. So there's a huge amount of expertise available. It's about coordinating it all and delivering it to the best benefit of the patient. So no matter where they are in Scotland, we can get them from the scene to the major trauma centre. The aim is within 45 minutes.
I think when we speak about like the opening of a major trauma centre, you think of a brand new building with some ribbon being cut out the front, but that's not quite right. It's not a building, is it?
No, it's not. It's not completely new. I mean, these are major hospitals already. So the Queen Elizabeth, one of the biggest sites and services in Europe. It's enormous, and it has all the skills that are required to deliver the type of service we're aiming to deliver. So what we will be doing is we will be changing some of the flows and systems within the regions around the trauma centres, so that, as I say, rather than going to the most accessible or available hospital, we will take them to the most appropriate hospital. The reason for that is there's no point in taking a patient to a hospital that doesn't have the expertise required to deal with that patient. There have been additional builds within these hospitals to create things like, for example, trauma wards or new resuscitation rooms or bigger resuscitation rooms or more capacity. But yes, you're right, it's not a brand new building, but there will be new buildings within the hospitals that are being created as part of the trauma service via the trauma network. It's an adaptation or an augmentation or a development of local facility. And, an example of that you can see at my hospital, for example, in Edinburgh, at the Royal Infirmary, that, there is a nice big new children's hospital and a big new neurosciences department with a big helipad sitting right on top of it, which is far more suitable to delivering trauma care on one site close to the receiving centre than perhaps where the previous helipad was, which is a long way away. So there's lots of new systems that have developed as a result of the trauma network that will be unrecognisable to a lot of people who work in these services. Well, we know for a fact that since it started in Aberdeen and Dundee, that these very quickly become the norm and the routine, and they're very positive benefits to the patients.
Is there such a thing as a typical day inside one of these major trauma centres?
I would say the days can be typical, but the presentations, the types of patients that you see will be varied and wide and wonderful. In the true sense of the word, is that you part of our job is that you just could not predict what will come in. You might be able to predict numbers, but actual nature of what happens can depend on, as I say, it can depend on weather, it can depend on conditions, it can depend on what people are doing in their lives, it can depend on people movements, it can depend on, well, for example, a pandemic right now. There's lots of other things that will either increase or decrease attendance and nature of attendance. There's a paradox there. For example, you would expect there to be less trauma during the pandemic. But in fact, the numbers have shown that there is, and certainly there has been more traumatic injury and illness. And it's the nature of it, things like DIY, consequences of mental health, or people doing crazy gardening things that they've now got the opportunity to do. But, by doing crazy gardening things, you do it with big spiky, jaggy machines that can create horrific consequences if you've not been used to using them. So there's been a change in what you might call the demographic of the trauma. The nature of it has changed during the pandemic, which again we perhaps didn't predict. We knew that something would be different, but we didn't quite realise where our bread and butter work would be coming from. But a lot of, you can imagine, distressed mental health situations and a lot of home environment traumatic injury has happened, perhaps less than road traffic. But again, that has confounded us. We've seen a lot of that as well. People have been getting out and about, going up into the hills, going out doing open air exercise, out on bikes, etc., etc. So we have had, bizarrely, more trauma than we thought we would do, given that we have been in various stages of restricted travel or lockdown throughout the last few months. But that's part of what makes it very interesting and how we have to adapt and respond to it. And
is the nature of the type of trauma, obviously it's been affected by the pandemic, but is it affected by which region you're in? Just when you mentioned, people doing like open air exercise and, going hill walking, are you more likely to get different types of trauma in, say up north than you are in urban areas like Glasgow or Edinburgh?
Yes is the answer. But again, you can get both. We're coming into winter now, and clearly, the north will see a lot of environmental injury, weather-related injury, road traffic consequential to weather changes, but also, mountaineering, climbing, even any form of outdoor exercise. There's a potential for something to happen in terms of injury or trauma. The nature of it is hard to predict until it actually happens. So we just have to be prepared and ready for whatever may be thrown at us.
The Connected podcast is now available on all your favourite podcast platforms.
Remember to follow us on Twitter at NHS NSS and use the hashtag NSS Podcast to submit any stories you want us to chat about in the future.
Thank you very much, Lisa and Karen. And now it's time for our regular news roundup. Now, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport, Miss Jean Freeman, recently visited the first regional hub laboratory to go live. This was a project which NSS was at the very heart of, ensuring that the new Glasgow West hub, located at Gartnavel Hospital, was ready to go in time, and it's going to be key to our future regional testing capabilities. So a big well done to the people from Health Facilities Scotland, from PGMS, our teams involved in laboratories and testing, and everyone across NSS who contributed to make that possible. In the last episode, we brought you the news that Mary Morgan would be our new NSS Chief Executive. In this episode, we're bringing you some more Chief Executive news from around the NHS, and it's to recognise the appointment of our very own Jim Miller, our Director of Procurement, Commissioning and Facilities, who has been asked to take the reins at NHS 24, our sister health board. Obviously, it's a great opportunity for Jim, and it's a fantastic board to work for, but I know he'll be very much missed by all of his colleagues within NSS for all the work that he's done here. So we wish Jim all the best with that move, and I believe he starts on April the 1st.
Stewart Robison from Digital and Security gives us the lowdown on Office 365 and what's next for us. He also talks a bit about, away from the workplace, how he's been coping with lockdown with a young child, something a few of us can relate to.
So thank you so much for joining us, Stuart. So could you just tell us, for people that maybe don't know you in NSS, what does your job role involve?
So I'm the product owner for the NSS 365 implementation. And if you're not familiar, product owner is an agile term. So the role of the product owner is to ensure that the product that you are rolling out gives the most value to its users. So my job is to speak to the SBUs and our stakeholders and DAS and make sure that 365, when we finally have it all in place, meets the needs of everyone who needs to use it and everyone who needs to administrate it. So essentially just making sure that people are happy and then taking those things and prioritising the work of the project team.
And has that always been your type of job, or did you do something else before you started doing that in NSS?
I've done many things in NSS. I mean, I started working here in 2005, I think, and I've worked in medical registration and HBS and then in corporate for the last few years, ever since we started working in agile fashion. Yeah, I've kind of taken on that role, although this is the first time I've had it as a formal job, if you like.
And what about before NSS? Did you have any interesting jobs or anything before you started working here?
Depends on your definition of interesting. For the benefit of everyone, I failed to become a nurse. I studied for 3 years and then dropped out after 2. Then I worked in bars and was a semi-professional musician for quite a long time. And then that cost a lot of money because, number one, you don't make a lot of money working in bars. And number two, you spend a lot of money being a semi-professional musician. So I eventually had to get a job. My friend worked in NSS and told me about a job that was coming up and I applied for it. I've been here ever since.
So one of the big things that are going on at NSS is the rollout of Teams, and that's something that you've been at the forefront of. And I think a lot of people will recognise your name from helping them out on Teams. What has been the most challenging part of that rollout?
Well, the speed at which it happened in March was probably the most challenging part. You know, our intention with the programme was that we would do mail migration. And then, so everyone would have a new email address. And then we'd start thinking about data migration. And while we were doing that, we would roll out Teams in a kind of all the way through that, we would roll out Teams in little pilots. So, you know, when people started using Teams, they would have all the integrated functionality that Teams relies upon. But then, you know, the world fell apart and we had to roll it out to 4,000 people in 1 week, in 5 days, as opposed to 6 months or however long we were going to do it. So that was an interesting week. And obviously, as everyone will have experienced over the last 6 months, we've all been essentially muddling along and trying to figure out how we use it and how we don't use it. That's been a challenge. It's been fun. And I think we've all done really well. Everyone adapted very quickly to the new way of working, which is, I think, testament to how well the organisation operates in a crisis.
I think so, and I've never heard anyone say anything bad about Teams or how it's rolled out. Everyone's found it to be, at least from my experience, they've found it to be really, really helpful as part of their job. But is there anything that we can do as NSS colleagues to help DAS help them? I know I find myself troubleshooting, and I see a lot of people asking questions in the Teams channel where they can get help on the rollout. But what can we do to make that easier for people working in DAS?
I think if there's one thing that's different about the organisation's relationship with 365 as opposed to other products that we might have, is that we don't own this software. We are buying it as a service from Microsoft. And so a lot of the things that a user doesn't know, or where something has gone wrong, either we don't have the information to help the user fix it immediately because it's not our product, or we can't fix it because it's not our product. So, we've had a lot of requests for user guides and things like that. These are all available online, and that's where we would look. And we've been talking recently about creating knowledge bases in ServiceNow and things. But essentially all we'd be doing is copying the web pages. 9 times out of 10, if one has a question about something in Teams or in the new email system or about Microsoft 365 that isn't related to specifically how it is being applied in the NSS, you can find that basically by typing your question into Google.
Yep, so if in doubt, Google first, ask second.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, quite a lot of the time that's what we're doing when you ask us for an answer.
Yeah. I know you sort of started, in the kind of midst of the pandemic, or you started the rollout because of the pandemic, but has your job itself changed because of the current situation?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I started this job in February, so it's been like this since the start. I mean, the team I work with currently is quite a few people that I worked with previously, and so the way that we worked before was really, there was quite a lot of meeting in collaboration spaces and talking in person at length about things. So I suppose that's different. This way of working works really well for some things when it comes to, really getting into the detail of stuff, when you start not having a lot of knowledge about something, but want to leave a conversation having a better understanding of it. I find that works better if you're all sitting next to one another in person and you've got a big wall or something you can write on. I don't find that it works quite as well in this situation. So, we're still trying to figure out how to do that properly. But no, nothing's really changed because it's been like this since the start.
And since you've started in February, what has been your proudest moment so far?
I think just the mail migration, while it's really something of limited value, all you're doing is giving someone a new email address. It doesn't change a great deal of things. But I like to think that the way that we've gone about doing that, because it is a complex thing to do, collecting all the information and making sure everyone's aware of what's happening. I would like to think that colleagues in the SBUs that we'll be working with to make it happen feel that it's been properly collaborative and transparent, and that they have been properly involved in all the things that have been happening. And I do get that impression from them. So I'm quite proud of the way that we've conducted the project so far in that sense. And I actually just haven't got it done. It would be hard enough if everyone was sitting in the office, never mind no one sitting in the office.
Yeah. And now that rollout of the new email has taken place, what is next for DAS? Is there something else on the horizon coming?
So we need to get our data into the cloud, into SharePoint or into Teams or wherever it is best used. Teams in 365 is kind of predicated on data being available in the cloud and not on servers based in a data center somewhere that we own and run. So we're going to start looking at that. Mail migration is complex. Data migration is, at the moment, it's beyond complex, but hopefully we'll make it less complicated as we go through.
So you're working from home currently, and I know that you are dad of a wee one, Arthur. What's it been like working from home with him?
The first few months were, don't say tough, because it's not tough, sitting in your home, sitting in your house. My wife and I are lucky enough to have a house with enough space where we've both got space to work. And he's 1 year old. So the first few months, obviously, he couldn't go to childcare. My mum couldn't come across to look after him. I was extremely busy at work. So it was probably far tougher for my wife than it was for me. She was less busy. She works for the government, and her department at government didn't have a great deal to do with the crisis at the beginning of the crisis. So she was kind of tended to be looking after him while I was sitting here from 7:30 in the morning to 6 o'clock at night, having conversations with various people about mail and Teams and things. But it's been good. You know, who would complain about getting to spend all of their time with their children?
And when he was born, you brought him into the office and he was so cute. Just such a chill baby. Is he the same? Is he still pretty chill?
No, he's a monster. He lives to destroy.
And you mentioned earlier, like, you were a semi-professional musician. Are you still playing with your band just now, or has the pandemic sort of halted that?
Late last year, I joined a band, a rock trio, with a couple of mature gentlemen, let's say, and we couldn't practice for obviously any of the first few months of the crisis. All the practice studios were closed and stuff, but we've been getting back in. It's been good fun. One of them takes this all very seriously. One of them thinks it's all a hoax. So it's an interesting dynamic. There's no gigs coming up, and I don't know if there will be for the foreseeable future, which is quite annoying because it's quite nice to get out and smash stuff and play drums. So, you know, I smash things. It's quite nice.
I can see where Arthur's getting it from then, if you likes to tear up the house. And I'm assuming like live music and things is probably one of the things that you've missed most about normal life in the past 6 months. Is there anything else that you're really missing?
Well, I haven't really missed playing the drums because I've got a digital drum kit downstairs that I've been playing most days, to be honest. But I played a lot of sport. I played a lot of touch rugby, to be specific. And our season runs from April till October. So we haven't done any of it. We got out to train a few weeks ago and someone immediately tested positive for COVID. So everything's been called off again. So that's kind of done. I've volunteered to help coach one of a men's union team in Glasgow. So I'll see where that goes. But yeah, it's having a run about a couple of times a week. I have very much missed doing that. So
what are you looking forward to most when things get back to normal, either in a work capacity or in your personal life?
I'm not sure things will get back to normal. I don't think the world will probably never go back to the way it was, which is both good and bad. But I'm looking forward to professionally taking the momentum that we've had so far in the project with everyone that we've worked with and getting all of the rest of the stuff done and really changing the way people are able to work. Personally, I suppose now I'm looking forward to, it'll be next year, getting some gigs, being able to go to training. There's selection coming up for Scottish national teams and things, which I'll go for. So, and also, you know, my son getting older and starting to talk will be fun. It might not be that much fun.
Yeah, we'll see what he says first before we say that.
Being able to just go for a pint will be nice. So I'm looking forward to being able to do that again, hopefully at some point.
And there you have it. This final festive edition of Connected for 2020 is in the books. Thanks to Stewart, to Jacqui, and to Martin, and to all our other guests during this year. We look forward to having you join us again in 2021. But until then, from Lisa, Karen, and myself, have a wonderful Christmas and a Happy New Year.